27 million Americans sit inside active storm and extreme heat zones across the nation today. A heat index pushing toward 110 degrees is crushing the Central Plains right now. Elevated supercells tonight in the Northern Plains are targeting 75-mile-per-hour outflow gust. 3 hazards are running simultaneously today, which means no region of the country escapes danger. The heat dome is the dominant story, cemented over the heart of America and not moving an inch. Extreme heat warnings span eastern Kansas through western Missouri, which means millions face dangerous conditions today. Those warnings cover dozens of counties, which means tens of millions are under active heat hazard alerts today. Heat index values of 105 to 110 degrees persist today, which means dangerous exposure continues through this evening. Overnight lows stuck at 75 to 80 degrees, which means no recovery window exists between the heat peaks. Dale Toledo electrician woke up to a heat index already at 103 degrees this morning. His AC has run nonstop all weekend, which means his power bill this month is going to hurt. Toledo is near 105 degrees heat index today, which means the peak afternoon hours carry the greatest risk. Good Lord, that is no way to start a Monday morning in the Ohio Valley and lower Midwest. A second weather layer is developing simultaneously, which means multiple severe threat areas are now active. The Storm Prediction Center issued a slight risk for 3.4 million people in the Northern Plains tonight. That slight risk spans 107,000 square miles, which means supercell territory covers a massive overnight target area. Large to very large hail is the primary overnight hazard, which means vehicle and crop damage is likely. The Lee cyclone tracks northeast into South Dakota overnight, which means storm forcing builds throughout the night. That cyclone pulls Gulf moisture westward, which means storm fuel loading increases steadily through the night. Margaret, retired nurse in Lake Charles, says the Gulf South gets no credit for its heat danger. Gulf Coast dew points near 80 degrees multiply felt heat, which means outdoor conditions become suffocating today. Dew points in the low 80s are tropical, which means sweating stops working as a cooling mechanism entirely. Mid-level winds near 50 knots from Colorado to the Dakotas, which means wind shear is robust for supercells. 60 knots of effective shear strongly favors rotating supercells, which means organized hail-producing storms are expected after dark. Baseball-sized hailstones are possible in this shear environment, which means all vehicles in the Dakotas should be sheltered. Wisconsin also carries a marginal risk tonight for isolated large hail and strong gusts. A warm advection corridor across Wisconsin creates overnight lift, which means isolated hail and gusts are possible. The marginal risk covers 23.7 million people, which means most viewers still face a real storm threat today. Charlotte and Raleigh sit inside the marginal risk, which means afternoon storm development is possible in the Carolinas. Frank, retired teacher in Springfield, has volunteered at the local cooling center since Saturday morning. He says cooling center attendance set a new record, which means the community is taking the heat seriously. Springfield faces 108 degrees heat index this afternoon, which means the peak danger window arrives very soon. A mid-level disturbance moves southeast today, which means storm initiation in the Carolinas is imminent this afternoon. That disturbance reaches the Piedmont with precipitable water near 2 inches, which means ample storm fuel exists today. Steepening lapse rates are priming the Carolinas' atmosphere for organized storms, which means timing is key. Primary hazard for the Carolinas is scattered wind damage with gusts of 50 to 60 miles per hour. A 30-knot wind belt organizes storm cold pools, which means squall line structures could briefly form today. No joke, 50 to 60 mile per hour gust knock mature trees right onto power lines. The Carolinas storm window tapers near sunset today, which means the hazard period is well-defined and short. Sandra Alexandria librarian says the sky looked dark and ominous to the south around noon today. Alexandria sits at the marginal risk edge, which means isolated strong gusts remain possible through early evening. Back to the 3 numbers, 27 million, 110-degree heat index, and 75-mile-per-hour gusts confirmed tonight. A sharpening West Texas dry line is triggering high base storm development from late afternoon onward. Intense surface heating pushes storm bases very high, which means outflow becomes the dominant hazard out there. Earl, South Dakota rancher, says his area has been watching the sky all day today. He says baseball-sized hail destroys a wheat crop in minutes, which means tonight's storm watch is critical. West Texas inverted V profiles cause storm collapse, which means outflow gusts reach 60 to 75 miles per hour. Y'all in Amarillo and Lubbock watch for high base storms and damaging outflow after 4 p.m. today. The Carolinas and Southern Virginia stay on alert this afternoon, which means early outdoor plans need adjusting. Comment your city below and we will cover your local conditions in tonight's full forecast update. All 3 storm hazards, Dakotas, supercells. Carolinas, wind damage. West Texas, outflow remain live tonight. The heat dome adds a 4th hazard, with heat index values topping 110 degrees for millions today. Tonight's Dakotas event is textbook for a supercell outbreak, which means the risk is very real after dark. The Lee cyclone from northeast Colorado is the primary forcing mechanism for tonight's northern plains storms. As the cyclone tracks north, it draws warm, moist air westward, which means storm fuel loading is active. South Dakota's interior sits north of the cyclone track, which means it is the primary storm target tonight. These elevated supercells have bases above the boundary layer, which means visual confirmation is difficult after dark. Dale back in Toledo is already tracking radar and says the Dakotas setup tonight looks impressive. Elevated storms maximize hail production efficiency, which means hailstone size in this setup runs larger than average. Elevated supercells produce large hail under moderate radar returns, which means the entire zone must stay alert. Bismarck and Rapid City sit within tonight's slight risk, which means local awareness is essential for both cities. Fargo and Aberdeen fall inside the broader storm window heads up to all residents in both communities. The mid-level cap across eastern Iowa is holding, which means severe potential there is actively suppressed tonight. That cap persists overnight, which means the entire storm focus shifts to the Dakotas and Wisconsin. Wisconsin carries a marginal risk for isolated large hail and gusty winds from elevated clusters. Madison and Green Bay sit in Wisconsin's overnight storm zone, which means residents should stay alert after dark. Warm advection across Wisconsin supports elevated Cape aloft, which means isolated hail-producing storms are possible. Margaret back in Lake Charles says Gulf residents are already 3 straight days in the dangerous heat. New Orleans sits under a heat index of 104 to 106 degrees, with overnight lows barely below 82. Memphis is forecast for 107 degrees heat index at peak, which means outdoor exposure is genuinely dangerous. Honest to goodness, overnight Gulf South temperatures are so warm that sleeping without a sea is a health risk. The heat risk index sits at extreme for outdoor workers and anyone without access to indoor cooling today. At extreme heat risk, illness rates climb sharply, which means millions of vulnerable people face real medical risk. Frank back in Springfield says cooling center usage doubled, which means demand is still growing by the hour. He says heat exhaustion strikes faster than expected, which means seeking shade before feeling sick is critical. Heat exhaustion symptoms: heavy sweating, weakness, and a rapid pulse signal the body's warning to act. Heat stroke above 104 degrees is a medical emergency. Call 911 and apply cooling immediately. Sandra in Alexandria says the heat index is climbing toward 100 degrees across the mid-Atlantic today. Washington, D.C. will see heat index values of 103 to 106 degrees by Tuesday and Wednesday. Philadelphia and Baltimore climb into the 103 to 108 degree range from Tuesday through Thursday. Mark my words, afternoon hours, 1 to 5 p.m. carry the highest heat exposure risk of the day. Back to the 3 numbers, 27 million in storm zones. 110-degree heat, 75-mile-per-hour gust, still active. Every benchmark, there remains a confirmed active threat from National Weather Service data this morning. Earl back in South Dakota says he told all nearby ranchers to stay in contact tonight. He says large hail moves fast, which means getting every vehicle into covered shelter before dark is essential. Starting with the Central Plains city-by-city heat index breakdown for today's peak afternoon hours. Kansas City expects a heat index of 107 degrees today, with overnight lows stuck near 79 degrees. Wichita is forecast near 106 degrees heat index, which means mandatory outdoor work breaks are a safety requirement. Omaha faces 103 to 104 degrees heat index, which means brief outdoor exposure carries a real physical toll. Des Moines is forecast for 101 to 103 degrees heat index during afternoon peak heating today. St. Louis sits in the bullseye at 106 degrees heat index, with overnight lows stubbornly above 78 degrees. Chicago expects 103 to 105 degrees heat index, which means cooling centers there face surging demand today. New York City and Boston are approaching 100-degree heat index readings by midweek as the dome expands. The heat dome grips from the southern plains all the way north to the Canadian border today. Indianapolis, Columbus, and Cincinnati face the same pattern. Scorching days with zero overnight recovery. Dale back in Toledo says his daughter in Salt Lake City is watching this heat dome already. The heat dome will not retreat through the holiday period, which means multi-day stress builds for millions. Models agree the upper-level ridge holds its position through the 4th of July holiday period with confidence. No cold front capable of breaking this heat dome appears on any model before early to mid-July. Heat index values stay elevated day after day, which means cumulative heat stress accelerates for exposed communities. The ridge is forecast to amplify through the holiday period, which means the heat dome actually strengthens further. Ridge amplification means the worst heat index days for millions in the east may still lie ahead. Current models show little heat relief east of the Rockies before mid-July at the earliest. The 4th of July holiday carries extreme heat, with outdoor celebrations facing heat index values above 100. Fireworks events and cookouts carry elevated heat illness risk when heat index values hold above 100 degrees. Schedule outdoor holiday activities before 10 a.m. and move indoors during peak afternoon hours. Keep water at hand constantly. Hydration is critical when the heat index holds above 100 degrees. Dale, circling back from Toledo, is watching the holiday fireworks from inside his air-conditioned house. He learned the hard way about outdoor heat, which means his family stays indoors during peak hours now. The heat dome is slowly retrograding toward the Rockies and the Four Corners region of the West. Good grief, the interior West faces triple-digit heat while active wildfires are already burning in multiple states. Utah and Arizona sit in the retrograding highs path, which means extreme heat is rapidly building there. Phoenix ranks among the nation's hottest cities, and this pattern pushes temperatures into dangerous territory. Salt Lake City is forecast to climb toward 105 to 108 degrees as the heat dome settles westward. El Niño is reinforcing above normal Pacific temperatures, which means the western heat has considerable long-range fuel. Margaret back in Lake Charles says she has family in Phoenix and calls them daily about the heat. Dry terrain in Utah and Arizona combined with high heat and gusty winds creates critical fire weather. Red flag conditions combining low humidity, high heat, and gusty winds are active across the Southwest today. Gusts over Utah and Arizona can spread wildfire perimeters rapidly, which means fire risk is extreme right now. Frank back in Springfield has a colleague in fire management who says conditions out west are alarming. Back to the three numbers, 27 million in storm zones, 100 10-degree heat, 75 mile-per-hour gusts still active. Flat out, the interior west fire outlook is every bit as serious as the eastern heat story today. Current models show little change in the western pattern, which means fire conditions persist through next week. Back to the tropics, a system is worth monitoring in the southwestern Atlantic near the Carolina coast. The National Hurricane Center is watching a disturbance that models suggest could develop near the Outer Banks. Model guidance shows possible tropical depression development near the Carolina coast around the 4th of July holiday. Sandra back in Alexandria says she always tracks Atlantic systems because the mid-Atlantic coast is close. The ridge placement supports low-level convergence near the southeastern coast, which means development is plausible. El Niño is elevating Atlantic sea temperatures, which means any developing coastal system has ready energy beneath it. Forecast confidence for the tropical potential is low at this range, but monitoring remains the responsible call. The East Pacific is also seeing elevated activity as El Niño-influenced warm water expands across the basin. East Pacific systems near El Niño warm water intensify rapidly, which means those systems need careful monitoring. We will watch both ocean basins through the 4th of July holiday period and update you regularly. Do yourself a solid. Set county-level severe alerts on the NWS app before tonight's storm window opens. Here is the bottom line for today. 3 major weather hazards are colliding across the United States. Extreme heat is the dominant threat, with tens of millions under active warnings and no imminent relief. The Dakota's overnight supercell event brings large hail and 75-mile-per-hour outflow gusts after dark. The Carolinas and West Texas face separate afternoon storm threats centered on wind damage and outflow gusts. Earl, wrapping up from South Dakota, says his radar is on and the horizon looks ominous tonight. Comment your city and state below so we can track the heat and storms for your location tonight. Tonight's update will cover live radar, heat index readings, and storm reports from every affected region. Margaret, wrapping up from Lake Charles, asks every viewer to check on elderly neighbors during this stretch. Checking on a neighbor takes 5 minutes and could genuinely be the most important thing you do today. Frank in Springfield says cooling centers will operate through Thursday night at minimum across central Illinois. Plan outdoor activities before 10 a.m. and give afternoon heat the same respect you give a storm warning. Heading into the 4th of July holiday, eastern cities are running 10 to 15 degrees above normal. Some 4th of July celebrations are on track for the hottest conditions on record in years. Nobody is ready for 100-plus heat index readings day after day, but that is the forecast reality. Sandra in Alexandria and Dale in Toledo both say this heat event feels unlike anything in recent memory. The strength and duration of this heat dome match the characteristics of a historically significant event. Plain and simple, hydrate constantly and never underestimate what sustained extreme heat does to the body. Roaring back with a vengeance, the summer heat of 2026 has announced itself loud and clear today. All 3 numbers from the top of this forecast are front and center when we check back tonight. 27 million in storm zones, 110-degree heat index, 75-mile-per-hour gusts. Stay safe and stay informed.